nearly 10 years since my burnout experience, and I believe that it wasn't necessary for me to burn out, and it's not necessary for you either. In this podcast, my guests and I share our real-life experiences with burnout. We get into the science of stress and share actionable tips on how to prevent burnout and how to recover from it. I'm Hannah Holden, ex-management consultant and burnout survivor. I work with management consultants to help them avoid and overcome burnout. I help them to get intentional about their choices, rebuild their energy, and embed new healthy habits so that they can get back to loving life. Hello and welcome to this special episode of the podcast, because this is the point in time where I am renaming the podcast. When I first started, I started out naming it Let's Talk About Stress, and I'm in the process now of renaming it to Burnout Isn't Necessary. So this episode is special partly because of that, and partly because I'm going to turn the tables a bit, and rather than me be interviewing somebody else, I have asked Adam and James, ex-colleague of mine from Devo team, to join me today to interview me. So welcome, Adam, and at this point I am now going to hand the controls over to you. It's over to you. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, I guess. For those who clearly probably don't know me, this is the first podcast I've ever done. My name's Adam. I worked for Hannah for probably 2 or 3 years, and was taught a great deal about consulting from Hannah. So that's me. It's me interviewing you this time. List of a few questions, and sort of hopefully keep it as a bit of a back and forth. But I've listened to a few of your podcasts. Given that we used to work together, and obviously sort of stayed in touch since. So listened to a few of the podcasts about stress, and you've mentioned that you're looking at transition the focus onto burnout. So are you all right to just kind of explain the reasoning behind that, why you're looking to focus on burnout?
Yeah, so there are a few reasons, and the decision kind of came to me slowly but surely during January. So we're now at the end of February. And there are a number of things going on and a number of conversations that I was having, but I think one in particular kind of sums it up, really. So this person asked me, well, why is it you're doing what you're doing? What is it that motivates you? And so I went straight back to my personal burnout experience, which was now nearly 10 years ago. And I was explaining, so without repeating episode 1 of the podcast, I explained that I felt lost. I didn't recognize myself. I was physically and mentally and emotionally exhausted. I felt empty. I felt like I was a shell of myself, and I was in a dark place, and I didn't really know how to get myself out of it. Like the path ahead was not clear. Mm-hmm. And I was saying to him, and it just doesn't need to be like that. Burnout isn't necessary. People don't need to go to that point to be able to get better. That we can nip things in the bud before it gets to the point of full burnout. At any point we can make decisions that we want to turn our lives around and head more towards health and well-being. And his response, and he comes from a marketing background, was, well, that's all very interesting, but there was one thing in particular that you said that was interesting, which is burnout isn't necessary. You might like to name your podcast that. So whilst that wasn't the one and only conversation, I didn't just suddenly say, yeah, that's a good idea, I'll rename my podcast. I think that kind of summarizes why. But I've also been reflecting on my own journey and what it is that I'm all about. What is my story? What is it that I want to help people with today? What is it that motivates me? And it all does come back to that experience of burnout. The previous title was very vague, very broad. Let's talk about stress. It's a huge topic, but burnout is an equally huge topic. And I think, I now want to zoom in on that. And I've also been thinking about, what do I want to do? How do I want to help people? And I really feel drawn to bringing together all of my experience. And so that covers, you know, my 20 plus years in projects and programs and working closely with IT organizations and in consultancy. So I really understand that corporate world intimately, you know, IT departments and consultancies in particular.
Yeah.
And in the background, I've also got 10 years of yoga practice, 2 yoga teaching qualifications. I'm passionate about mindfulness. I think that breath work is amazing because in the space of 30 seconds, you can change how you're feeling emotionally, mentally. You can change your energy levels just by practicing breath work. I think these are life hacks. They should be taught in primary schools, and yet they're not. And I feel passionate about wanting to share some of that. And I'm aware that the word yoga, kind of, many people have these ideas about what yoga is, that I'm not strong enough, or I'm not bendy enough, or I don't want to wear lycra. But when I talk about yoga and these techniques that are available to us, we're all in human bodies, and these life hacks, these techniques help all of us. And I really want to kind of debunk them and try and remove as many barriers for people as possible to make sure that we all have access to these amazing well-being techniques.
Yeah.
And then, so there are quite a few aspects of me that I'm trying to bring together, and I love working with people, and I think you will have seen this, and you can probably come back to me and give me your thoughts on this, but metaphorically, I see my role in working with other people as being one of giving them a leg up. I always see myself as like the one interweaving my fingers and helping them to step into their full potential. And I don't know if there's anything special in me about my ability to see the potential in others, but I think there is something in me about helping people realize their potential. And so I really want to, and that's what makes me tick. Underneath all of these interests and stuff, what I'm really passionate about is helping people realize their full potential. And so at that unique intersection of all of those experiences, those corporate experiences, what I'm passionate about is where I want to be working. I want to work at that intersection where it's all relevant. And I think that's about me helping people who are experiencing burnout. I've got personal experience of burnout, who are in stressful work environments, because I understand that, and I can help them with these techniques and these habits that I've learned and developed over the years to get back to feeling well again. So that's where it's all come from. Last year I was creating a course on stress management, and I had this vision to create this course which was almost like a smorgasbord of tips and techniques for them to experiment with. But I've kind of come to the realization, kind of from December through to January, that actually most of that's probably available on YouTube. And really what I need to do is work one-to-one with people or in smaller groups. I want to be tailoring my recommendations to them because, you know, I've worked with a client who has chronic fatigue, for example, so we need to make sure that these techniques that we're using with her build up her energy reserves, and that and don't deplete them. We can't go full out, let's do this, you know, routine with you. We need to, so we need to tailor it. And I think that I've got so much experience that's you know, that's kind of my sweet spot, being able to tailor stuff for people and show them this is what will work for you, and be far more prescriptive about it rather than here's everything, try it all and find out what works. I can instead work with people to understand their challenges, their limitations, and therefore what would be the best thing for them. So I've worked on creating this program, which I'm calling Reboot from Burnout, which is bringing all of that together and being a bit more prescriptive so that somebody has kind of a roadmap out of burnout using these techniques and leaning on all of that experience. Yeah.
A plan on a page.
Yes.
For the consultants out there.
Yes, a plan on a page. Tailorable to your requirements.
A nice Gantt chart for everyone. It's quite the intersection, isn't it? Because from, you know, like sort of the experience, like, you know, I'm joking about it there, but the experience, you know, like sort of that you have as a consultant, and fusing that with, you know, sort of a desire to give people a bit of a leg up. It's really, really interesting. I think.
So I do have. I can be, so as, like I said, with this program, I can be prescriptive, but at the same time, I don't have prescriptions around what fulfilling their potential looks like for them, because it's going to be unique to everybody. And for some people, part of their well-being journey will be to start a new career. For others, it will be to fall back in love with the work that they already do and the job and the workplace that they're already in, and explode their career from where they already are. So I and because I have that experience and I'm completely open-minded as to what the solution is for each individual, I think that I'm able to help them wherever wherever is the right path for them.
Yeah. Okay, nice. So sort of moving on a little bit, focusing on burnout, and we've discussed, sort of why that you personally want to focus on that. But, I want to understand, sort of how much of a problem are you seeing burnout is, sort of within, say, the UK, for example, or like within, sort of like, as you kind of put it, like high-flying professionals within the UK. Sort of what are the hard numbers, so to speak?
Yeah,
I guess.
So I knew this was coming, so I've done a bit of research. So according to NICE, an estimated 13.7 million workdays are lost every year in the UK due to work-related stress. So that's not necessarily at the extreme of burnout, but work-related stress, which is on the burnout scale, right? Because the WHO described burnout as being the syndrome that you experience when you haven't managed the stress. And let me find the exact words for that one.
Is that people, like finding themselves just unable to come into work and pull in a sickie because they can't face, actually being in the workplace because it's that much of a awful experience for them?
Yeah, so the WHO definition for burnout is that it's a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So whilst those 13.7 million man days are not all necessarily people who are experiencing burnout, they are all showing symptoms of workplace stress. And if that continues, it becomes chronic workplace stress. And if it is not successfully managed, it becomes burnout. So that gives us an indication of the potential and the scale of what's going on. I think, so my experience with burnout was 10 years ago. I think it was far more rare then, but it's becoming more and more prevalent. I think that lots of people were impacted by COVID, but they've also been impacted by coming back out of COVID and all of those changes that we've had to readjust to.
Is that also survivorship bias to a certain extent, right? Because it might not necessarily have been considered that much of an issue, sort of 10 years ago. Like within the last few years, we've been properly getting to grips with mental health in the workplace. If it's sort of being diagnosed and looked at more now, it might have been even more common, 10 years ago, 20 years ago even.
Yeah, and there are probably people like me who've experienced it and are now wanting to talk about it, which is raising people's awareness around it. So perhaps there were people who were experiencing burnout, but it was being labelled as something else. So,
or manifesting itself in different ways as well.
Sure.
And not being identified as the root cause.
Yeah, so I was talking to a consultant psychologist earlier who's going to be on a later episode, and he was explaining that he came into working with people who experience burnout, but his original speciality was addiction. And what he found when he was working with people who have addictions is that a number of them were using addiction to help support them through their burnout, and that underneath that was actually burnout.
Yeah.
And another person who I'm interviewing, and the episode will come in a couple of episodes' time, was somebody who depended on alcohol and effectively was experiencing burnout, and used alcohol as their prop to be able to get through life.
Yeah.
So a few more stats for you. More than half
Love a stat.
More than half of UK employees feel worn out by work, 57%. I found a study saying that 44% of workers have called in sick at some point due to feeling exhausted, stressed, depressed, overwhelmed, or unmotivated at work. All of those are kind of alarm bells for somebody heading towards burnout. The unmotivated at work in particular, for somebody who was once very motivated by work, if they are now unmotivated by work, that is a big red flag for burnout. And it's a shame because these are employees who are often very dedicated to their work. They're really passionate about the success of themselves, but also the business that they work in. But then there comes a point in time where it feels fruitless. It feels like, and they begin to become apathetic. And not just about work, they can become apathetic about many aspects of life. And it's a great shame because what you then have is like your star pupil becomes your problem child in the workplace. And so some people experiencing burnout end up in disciplinaries because they're not performing well at work. It's such a shame that's actually coming from a place of they've overinvested themselves when they were the star pupil. A Deloitte study into people's well-being found that nearly 70% of the C-suite are seriously considering quitting their job and finding a job that better supports their well-being.
Did Deloitte survey their own staff?
It was across sectors. So if there were some Deloitte stuff in there, I think it was a fair representation across a global community and across industries. Yeah, so that's not a reflection on Deloitte. Glassdoor reported a 43% increase in burnout being reported. I'm not sure over what time period that stat comes from, but I'm not surprised because recent years have been the COVID years, and I know that that's been really tough. And I think to talk about it less with stats and more with kind of what we're seeing, I think that burnout has been linked to the big resignation. And I've seen other studies that look both at the UK and globally, and it's not just the UK that's having this problem. This is a global problem. So I experienced it 10 years ago, but I think that it's only got worse since then. And the impact of burnout is personal, it's financial for businesses, it's financial for individuals, it impacts the global economy, so it's a big thing.
No, nice. You know, like in episodes, sort of 1 and 6 of your podcast, you did in quite vivid detail actually describe, sort of your own experience with burnout, and I just wanted to, sort of like find out, do you think that you yourself were particularly vulnerable to, this kind of stress and, like eventually burning out completely? Is that something that, sort of, was it intrinsic within yourself? Do you think you were just more susceptible to it?
Yes, I do think that I had certain attributes or have certain attributes that leave me susceptible to burnout, and I certainly had some habits back then that definitely contributed to burnout, but I don't think that these are unique to me. So I'm really determined for a start, Taurus star sign, determined, and I grew up believing that hard work is the answer. So if you want something, you have to work hard for it. And I had kind of tested and proved that to myself when I was at university. So I was predicted fairly average results and then worked really, really hard in order to get some good results by the time I left. But in doing so, I ended up in hospital around the time of my dissertation. And in retrospect, the fact that that happened to me, or more accurately, the fact that I did that to myself when I was 21 years old is a red flag for me to then go on and develop burnout. Because effectively what I was doing was burning the candle at both ends. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't eating particularly well. I was just working, and then a bit of partying and a fraction of sleep, and then back to work. And so the ability that I had then to override what my body was telling me and what I needed in order to be successful is a red flag to then go on to develop burnout. Because burnout involves us giving more than we're physically able to give. We can't maintain it at that level over an extended period. It involves us overriding signals from the body that we need to take a break, and we disconnect from our bodies and we just operate in our heads. And I was doing all of that by the age of 21. But if we fast forward 10 years, then I was in this job where I went on to experience burnout. The level of seniority that I went in at it felt a little bit of a stretch for me, but I wanted it. I really, really wanted to be in this job, and I really enjoyed the job. But I felt like it was a stretch, so I was battling imposter syndrome, and I was absolutely determined to prove myself. And the reason I mention the imposter syndrome is because studies have found a connection between people who experience imposter syndrome and then go on to develop burnout. So there I was doing everything that I could to make sure that I was going to be successful. And yeah, I was loving it. So I was working with clients on their business cases, I was collecting data, we were analysing the data and presenting back financial savings opportunities that we'd identified. And these were huge IT transformation programs, and I was really successful. But I was a perfectionist, and I wanted to be everything for everybody, and I really wanted to achieve, and I wanted to be successful in every aspect of life. And so yeah, I kind of stretched myself, and I think that overall these are the kind of things that leave somebody prone to burnout, along with that willingness to sacrifice myself, my health, and not really pay any attention to what my body was telling me, because I was so focused on that success in that kind of mental.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And so, like, whilst you were, sort of working in these kind of consultancy environments and with your clients as well, like, was there anyone who recognized what was going on sort of with you? Did anyone approach you about this? Was there any help offered to you? Like,
So I'm shaking my head.
Did anyone say anything? Yeah.
So there had been a change in the management, and my manager had left the organisation, and a couple of other key people had also left. And we hadn't done anything particularly strategic around that. So we hadn't kind of got together to say, what are the gaps left in the organisation now that these people have left? And how are we going to fix that strategically? Because ideally we would have been training people or hiring people to fill those gaps, but we didn't do anything like that. So, and in my position, I didn't see it as my position. Right now, looking back, I was completely blinkered to that as being a possibility. I certainly wasn't talking about we should hire people or we should train people. Instead, I just saw that my skills were similar to theirs. And so the obvious conclusion was I need to fill the gaps that these other people have left. My new manager had approached me and said, I'm here for you if you ever need me. So I think he was aware that there was a lot of pressure on me because these other people had left and I was trying to fill the gap. But I didn't want, he was very senior. In fact, he was the head of the UK, and I didn't really want to be asking him for help unless I really needed it. So that was a back pocket offer that I didn't take him up on until things got really bad. So there was one particular Friday where I knew I needed the weekend. I was not in a good place. I was exhausted. And emotionally I was beginning to get worn down by, probably not just by work, also by the stuff going on with, wanting to conceive, and that wasn't going to plan, and acne flare-ups happening. So no doubt there are like multiple things contributing to me needing a break, but I needed a break. So it's Friday afternoon, and I took a call from one of our clients who was ranting and raving, not in a good way, about our failure to deliver on something. The project was under-resourced, so we'd just been trying to do our best with what we had. And the only way that...
Was that you picking stuff up?
Yeah. So, we didn't have enough resources on the project to be able to deliver to those timeframes. And I guess I had been managing expectations in so much as this is when we will deliver. But I guess I hadn't heard that that was a problem until this phone call. So yeah, the only way that I could see that we were going to make the client happy was by me working the weekend. And I really didn't want to, but I couldn't see another way out of it. Well, you know, it was either disappoint the client or work the weekend as far as I could see, and disappointing the client doesn't seem like the right option, right? When you're in the thick of it. So I called him, and I was secretly hoping that he would say, let me call the client and take this up a level and reset some expectations. And I think I really wanted him to give me permission to take the weekend off, because I wasn't giving myself permission, and I knew I needed it. And I was kind of hoping that he would read between the lines that it's unusual for me to be making this call on a Friday night saying I've got a client kicking off, and the only way that I can do this is if I work the weekend, but I don't really want to.
Yeah, it should be a red flag to anyone.
And he, I mean, I probably didn't get him at a good time. I think he was walking at the time. He was out and about. I don't think he was in the office. But he said something like, well, what do you think I should do, Hannah? And I just really didn't have it in me to say, I think you should give me permission to take the weekend off. I think that you should phone the client and take all the slack. And so instead I just started mumbling and saying, well, the only way around this is if I work the weekend. And so that's kind of, it was only a 5-minute conversation. And by the end of it, I'd talked myself into working the weekend.
Yeah.
So that's the only conversation that I really remember having. As for clients just in consultancies, clients just want the outcomes they've paid for, right? So yeah. I think some consultants will work with the same client over a long period of time, and then they become almost part of the team. And because they become part of the team, people know them better. They see behavioral changes. They know when somebody's not okay, and they care because they've built a personal relationship. But for the most part, in my experience, for most of my clients, I haven't spent a lot of time really embedded in their team. And a lot of my challenge was being stretched across multiple clients, and trying to juggle, you know, multiple different time zones. And they're not interested in me juggling multiple clients, because it's not normally just one client's workload that breaks the consultant's back. It's the multiple, right? And so, clients don't necessarily see it. And they also just want the outcome, and it's the consultancy's job to look after their consultants, and so it's not really the client's role to. So no, there was never a conversation with a client, and I'm not sure they would have been in a position to spot anything. But I do feel like I've changed in the last 10 years. Of course, awareness has changed in the last 10 years. I would hope that a manager, and I believe that, you know, that manager would have responded differently had, you know, if this Friday somebody in his organization phones and has that conversation with him. I'd like to think that everything's moved on. So it's not really a judgment about how things were then. It's more, that's how it was.
And no, it's just 10 years ago as well. So in the grand scheme of things, probably not that long ago, really. But
long enough for mental health to be higher on the agenda for all organisations.
Yes.
I don't think anybody really received any form of mental health training back then, whereas now you'll have mental health first aiders in organisations. You know, it has moved on enough for people to see some of those flags, right? Whereas at the time, I don't think the awareness was there to even pick up on those red flags.
Yeah, and the stigma kind of goes away as well, so that people talk about it a little bit more nowadays as well. You know, sort of obviously in preparation for this podcast, I kind of did a bit of research on it myself, and, you know, sort of took a look at sort of the way that, you know, consultants perceive burnout and talk about burnout. And I mostly, you know, sort of like looked through internet forums to see how they were discussing it, and it was often discussed in, you know, sort of very, very, very different ways. So like some people would, you know, sort of make jokes and memes about, you know, sort of burning out, and you know, the crazy hours they were pulling during a day, or, you know, like sort of just, you know, sort of like often referring to, you know, like sort of feeling dead inside. And in other, you know, sort of areas, you know, like people were, you know, sort of genuinely, you know, like offering help and pointing to people towards resources. And, you know, sort of it's often also, you know, sort of treated as, you know, sort of par for the course, so to speak, within consultancy. Is in, you know, like at some point you are going to pull crazy hours, and you're gonna, you know, you're gonna hate your job, and eventually, you know, you're gonna get to the point where that you're gonna want to leave consultancy forever. And, you know, sort of maybe they're just not cut out for consultancy as a career. What do you think of the way that burnout is discussed within, you know, sort of consultancy that you've seen so far?
So I think I'm going to jump to, there are two different aspects, both of which I have a strong opinion about. So one of them is that kind of the organization implying that it's the individuals that are the problem, to create an environment where everybody's expected to over deliver, everybody's expected to work, you know, ridiculously long hours. It's expected for people to be working at midnight or over the weekend. I think my perspective when I was back in my role as head of business consulting, I would always set expectations with people that sometimes there are deadlines, especially when you've got a client delivery and it clashes with a sales deadline, because you've got no influence over sales deadlines. So if a client publishes an opportunity, a tender or whatever, they get to call the shots on the dates. And so you have to deliver against those dates, and sometimes it lands at the same time as your client delivery commitments that you've already made. So there are times where long hours are the only solution to being able to do it all, but it shouldn't become the norm, and it shouldn't become the expectation. And that in lieu of putting in the extra hours, you should make sure that you recover that and you look after yourself. So that was my perspective on it when I was back in my position. But I think the thing that we need to be careful of is these organizations that make out like it's the person that's the problem, because effectively they're gaslighting and they're not taking their own responsibilities. And so on one hand, I feel very strongly about that, but the other one I feel even more strongly about, which is I don't want it to swing the other way, where individuals then think that they're in this situation and it's somebody else's problem to fix it for them. Because I feel strongly about the gaslighting in organizations, but I feel even more strongly about people owning their own lives, owning their own choices, realizing that you've always got choices. Because a lot of people who get themselves into burnout, they're so close that they've got like myopic vision. They can't see the bigger picture. They can't see that they've got choices, and they think that this is the only way. And so we need to work with them to get them to see that bigger picture. And what I don't want is the conversation to veer so much towards it being the organization's responsibilities that people feel disempowered by that, because it's still their life and they can still make changes and they should still be making decisions. The conversations around consultancies in particular, I think historically, yes, it has been that bad. I think that some organizations are better, some organizations are worse. Personally, I don't find burnout particularly funny. So I won't be the one like posting the memes about it. I don't like the implication that people are not cut out for it, because if there's any talk along those lines, then it suggests that you're in a toxic environment. So yeah, I think that consultancies are not, can be a bad place, but like my mission when I was in position at Devo Team was to make it different, to show that consultancy could be different. It didn't have to be like that. And so for anybody who's in management in consultancies, it doesn't have to be like that.
Okay. Yeah. No. Thank you. And what I would say is, as well as you did, like when you were my boss and you were heading up business consulting, it never felt like, yes, like occasionally you did have to meet deadlines occasionally, but there was never that element of like sort of I don't want to say pressure or anything like that, but it was, you know, like I never felt uncomfortable like working towards this kind of stuff. Yeah, and it was always, you know, like well clarified as to why we were doing the work. It was, you know, sort of like there were boundaries that were set. It all felt very, it was just generally a good working environment. So
yeah. Well, back to my burnout isn't necessary. It's not necessary, and creating organisations that are toxic and the perfect storm, the perfect environment for somebody to experience burnout, that's not necessary either. You can run a successful consultancy business without frying your people every day.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on a little bit, what do you think you'd say to someone who's potentially recognized that they're, you know, sort of close to burning out? You know, they've started seeing the warning signs, you know, sort of you've discussed previously. You know, sort of if you could, you know, sort of collar them and give them a piece of advice, what would you say?
I think if I could give them one piece of advice, it would be to go easy on yourself. Because as somebody who's at risk of burnout, they are likely to be much the same as those traits that I was describing earlier: perfectionist, professionals, high standards, high achievers, don't like to admit defeat, don't like to admit that they need help because they've always been the strong ones, always been the ones that can solve the problem. And who am I if I can't solve the problem, because it becomes so entwined in your identity. So yeah, it would be to go easy on yourself. And I know that that's easier said than done, because there's that internal negative talk going on about not good enough. But yeah, that would be my advice. I recognize that it's easier said than done. And so if that does feel difficult, then perhaps they're at a point where they should be working with somebody to understand what that looks like and how they can do that.
Yeah. And so which kind of brings me on to my next question, which is, you know, like, if I was hypothetically someone who is beginning to recognize that I was struggling with burnout, you know, sort of what would be a good kind of place to start, and where can I get that kind of help that I need?
There are hundreds of books. There are loads of Facebook support groups. There are probably people at work, you know, mental health first aiders, HR. So there are plenty of places that you can turn to, but sometimes when you're in burnout, that the plenty of options is just overwhelming. So you really just want one place to go to. But I would say that if you think you need help, then you probably do. So go get it. I think it's really important to work with somebody that resonates with you. So at work, you might not have that many choices. So you might, you know, there might be one person to go to. But outside of work, if you want additional help, then you can go to whoever you resonate with. So make sure that you don't kind of think, well, I have to work with the first burnout coach that I find, because there are plenty of people who could help you. And so just make sure that you feel that it's somebody who understands you, and you know, that you feel heard, you feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable, then that's not the right person. So find somebody that, you know, that really resonates with you, because it's so important for any intervention that they're going to work with you on. It's important that that relationship is right, that you know, that the relationship is set up with somebody that you are willing to take the guidance from and can work with. And so me personally, I mentioned my Reboot from Burnout program, I think, earlier. So it's currently a one-to-one program, but I'm also looking at how I could extend it to work with groups. And so, you know, if somebody resonates with what I'm saying and thinks that they would like to work with me, then I think that's great. And I will include a link in the show notes for how you can access a free call with me. I'll put all of my contact details into the show notes.
Lovely.
Okay. I think we have come to a close, unless you've got any more questions or comments, Adam.
No burning questions. I think you've answered them pretty thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
No, pleasure. Thank you.
These
podcasts are here to help you manage your stress and burnout, and your feedback is really valuable. So please rate this podcast and also drop me a note with any questions, suggestions, or feedback that you might have. One of the most common questions I get asked is, where should I start? And I believe that the best place for you to start is to learn how to soothe your nervous system. I've created a free download with instructions for 5 different ways that you can do just this, and all of them work pretty much instantly. It's called the Essential Toolkit for Management Consultants. You can download it now at www.hannahholden.co.uk/essential. One last thing, it's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of your doctor, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.